I'm joined now by NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor and former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul. He is also an NBC News international affairs analyst. My thanks to both of you for being here. Yamiche, I'll start with you. The headline from the president's remarks to reporters today was supposed to be about tariffs, certainly. Instead, he seems to have turned the Ukraine-Russia negotiations upside down yet again. What did we hear specifically on that issue from the Oval Office?
Well, Peter, his remarks, the president's remarks about Ukraine and sort of what it could get from peace, I think was really striking. You heard the president really say that Russia in some ways was going to be calling the shots, including on whether or not Ukraine could even join NATO, saying that he believed Russia would not allow Ukraine to join NATO. Of course, that's been a big question, whether or not that country would be allowed in that European alliance. And that, of course, has been something that Ukraine has been very much pushing for. So to be saying that Russia would be the one sort of making that decision was a big deal. It was also very interesting to hear him back Pete Hegseth, of course, the defense secretary. He made a lot of headlines because Ukraine has been pushing to have its territory restored. We have to remind folks that this all started way back in 2014 when Russia first started invading Ukraine and took over Crimea, and then, of course, had since pushed through. We know that something like 10,000 civilians in Ukraine have died since this latest iteration of the war started 3 years ago. So for President Trump to also be saying that he trusts Russia when Vladimir Putin says that he wants peace, I think was another striking part of this. Of course, Volodymyr Zelensky has been saying that allies in the United States should really be cautious in taking anything that Vladimir Putin says at his word. So it's really, I think, striking that President Trump here seems to be doing just that, Peter. And
let me ask you, if I can, for a second, the president's praise and really, I think, his sort of trust of Vladimir Putin hits a familiar tone from his first term in office. In a lot of ways, this did sound like a redux of the first go-around, sort of warming a rapprochement, as it were, with Russia.
That's right, Peter. And, you know, you and I were there and covered President Trump the first time around together when there was a lot of questions about his relationship with Russia. And President Trump has been very clear this time around that he has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. He's been making very clear that he believes that he can negotiate and find a way to find peace between Ukraine and Russia, but really leaning in on the fact that he has a personal rapport with Vladimir Putin. So there were a lot of critics of President Trump who said that that rapport was actually too close and that there were some who were wondering whether or not Vladimir Putin even helped him win the election the first time around. Of course, there were big questions about the meddling in the election in 2016 on the part of Russia. But this time around, we did hear that sort of familiar tone from President Trump when talking about Russia. But I think it goes a step further because now you have Ukraine, who's been embattled and pushing back on this war that so many people thought they would not be able to wage successfully. They've been able to hold their ground in some ways and push back Russia on trying to take over large swaths of that country. And now President Trump is coming into office not sounding like someone who is going to be sort of leaning on the side of Ukraine when it comes to holding on to that territory.
And Yamiche, as we heard, Volodymyr Zelensky, of course, the president of Ukraine, has insisted that any American talks with Russia include Ukraine. These talks really do begin tomorrow. They're scheduled to happen with Zelensky and his team in Munich alongside Vice President, the Vice President of the United States will be there. Also, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, will be there. The National Security Advisor will be there. So when you got Vance and Zelensky on opposite sides of the table, what do we expect to become of these talks, and how could these comments affect the sort of tenor of them?
Well, I think the comments are definitely going to affect the tenor of them just in talking to experts, but also just in listening to what Volodymyr Zelensky is saying, which is that no one should be taking Russia at its word. And you have President Trump sounding like he's doing just that. So I think we can't underscore enough that President Trump is in some ways saying out loud that he believes what Ukraine is coming to the table asking for, even if that's just their opening negotiating tactic, that he doesn't believe that that's possible. So I think there's going to be real consequences there. What actually comes out of those conversations, I think, is a very big question that we don't know yet. I also underscore that our European allies, including Britain, want to also be part of those conversations. NATO wants to be part of those conversations when you think about a peace deal there. So I think there are a lot of people that are going to be involved. And President Trump did sort of hint at the idea. He said other people are going to be involved in this. Not, of course, saying that he's still going to take the lead here. So very interesting to see what happens, Peter.
Yeah, certainly, though, obviously, a lot of folks were concerned about Donald Trump speaking of Vladimir Putin before he spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky, effectively the Russians being the last voice in his ear as these negotiations got going. I want to ask Ambassador McFaul a little bit about this. Mr. Ambassador, if I can, your reaction to what you heard from the president as he spoke about Russia and Ukraine and Vladimir Putin, notably, the president said he would like Russia back in the G7, back in what would become the G8.
Oh, Peter, where to begin? There are so many mistakes in the way that President Trump is negotiating with Vladimir Putin to try to end the war, let alone talk about the G7 becoming the G8. First, let's start with the facts. President Biden did not start the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. He was not provoked by some new change in policy in just 1 year, a policy that was consistent with the Trump administration. Number two, these negotiations are important, and I'm glad President Trump is involved. I'm here at the Munich Security Conference, and everybody's talking about that there might be a chance for peace. But I've negotiated with the Russians as a former ambassador, as a former White House official, and I can tell you, you don't give them everything they want before you sit down at the table. It's illogical. I think most negotiations you don't start that way, but you most certainly don't start that way with Vladimir Putin. And by saying in public that Ukraine will not be a member of NATO and that Ukraine needs to give territory away to Russia, you're handing Putin gifts before the negotiations. Maybe those things have to happen to get to peace. I don't know, but they should be given as concessions in return for something that Vladimir Putin gives the Ukrainians and ultimately European security. So I don't understand the logic. I hope they tighten it up by the time they meet with President Zelensky tomorrow.
Ambassador McFaul, let me ask you something we heard from the president today. We've heard it from him many times before, where he says none of this happened on his watch. The annexation of territory in Ukraine, Crimea under Barack Obama, some of the other land in the east under Joe Biden. None of this happened under me, Donald Trump. Does he have a point there?
No, he does not have a point there. The war in Ukraine started in 2014. It raged in eastern Ukraine for the entire Trump presidency. And yes, he has a special relationship with Vladimir Putin. I take him at his word. But did he use that relationship to end the war then, during the Minsk Accords, during the Minsk agreements? No, he didn't. So this is, correlation. Yes, the war got bigger when President Biden came in. But the idea that none of this would have ever happened on his watch is just historically incorrect. And by the way, it doesn't help to bring about peace today now. I don't understand why we're litigating the history of the Biden administration every single day on this issue and many others. We should be focused, and I want the president's team should be focused on a real deal that would be good for the Ukrainians and also, by the way, include the Europeans. I'm here in Munich, and I can tell you people are outraged that the Europeans were not consulted in any of these initial consultations that the President of the United States did.
And I want to get into that with you, if I can, get more of your gut of what you're hearing on the ground there from America's European allies, but also what you think the impact is of Donald Trump speaking to Vladimir Putin for an hour and a half before speaking to Volodymyr Zelensky and inviting Vladimir Putin to the White House, saying he will go to Moscow without offering a similar invitation to Zelensky.
Well, of course, in my opinion, he should have talked to President Zelensky first, and then he should have called European leaders. He should have talked to all of Europe so that we had a coordinated position ahead of time. Second, he shouldn't have started to negotiate with Putin. Ultimately, this is for the Ukrainians to decide, including the democratically elected president of Ukraine. And the idea that Trump is going to do a deal with Putin and then just email it to Zelensky and say, here's your deal, I'm here to tell you that will not work. Ukrainians have not lost so many soldiers just to be dictated by the United States and Russian leaders what the terms of this deal would be. So I think they made some initial mistakes, and I hope they get back to thinking about, after all, the art of the deal. The deal has to be where both sides give and take something. It is not an artful deal if you just give Putin everything he wants and then tell the Ukrainians, accept it.
Ambassador McFaul, what's the consequence of this, do you think, this sort of changed relationship between the U.S. and Russia? Some of the president's allies would say, hey, it's good to have good relationships with these people, even if they're autocrats. What do you fear most? I'm
a former diplomat. I dealt with Vladimir Putin, too. I dealt with autocratic Russia, too. It's not the relationship is not the objective. It's what you do in those phone calls to achieve what objectives. And sometimes I think President Trump thinks just having a good meeting is the goal. No, that is a means to these other ends. So I'm not against him calling Vladimir Putin, but I want that call to result in things that are good for American national interests. And I think an enduring, lasting peace in Ukraine is in America's national security interests. I don't think capitulating to everything that Putin wants will lead to an enduring, just peace in Ukraine. And that has, I think, very negative consequences for us and our European allies.
Ambassador Mike McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. Mr. Ambassador, I appreciate your making time to speak to us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.